welcome to the session. Would someone grab the back door if someone has a chance? Thank you. So we want to get into a conversation with you and talk a little bit about raising money. I have terrific panelists here. I'll let them introduce themselves, but Susan, Mary, and Nick, people that I've worked with over the years, both to imagine projects, raise money for projects, fail miserably trying to get money for projects, all of those things sometimes combined into a single project. But we're all here to sort of talk about those kinds of things with you. Hopefully you will participate a lot. We're not trying to give a lecture, so jump in and ask questions if you need to, please. We do record these sessions, so I think there's at least one portable mic up here. If you have a hot question, come running up, grab the mic, or I'll try to find you and bring the mic to you. So we want to try to offer you some frameworks for planning technology-specific fundraising efforts. Concrete steps that you can take to ensure that you get these things funded in a way that's necessary. Digital is no longer controversial in the museum setting, right? I mean, especially in this crowd. There was time, all of us years ago were arguing whether or not digital was even necessary. Now it's more like, how the hell are we going to pay for this? Because everybody wants it. Everybody wants it yesterday. Everybody wants it fast. That's real money. That's capital investment money. That's long-term sustainability money. That's operating funding. All of these things are necessary for us to get our jobs done. So if you need to go and find money to do this kind of thing, it does require us to maybe step out of our bubble of the typical way that we talk to one another and translate some of our tech speak. And Susan's going to kick us off talking about that.
Okay, so I see tons of friends in this room who pretty much know everything that I'm going to say. I thought, the conference is really young this year, so I thought this would be kind of remedial and I'd, say things that would be useful. But I'm going to go super fast because you guys know this stuff. And feel free to call me out if you think I'm saying something stupid. I told Douglas that I was going to talk about some work that I used to do when I was at the Met in training development staff to think about talking about technology. I love to write grant proposals. Those of you who know me, I've probably read some of your proposals. I possibly written some of them. I love grant proposals because I think they're sort of the perfect expression of my soul, my team's soul, the projects that we're developing. They're your chance to say exactly what you want to say, and it would be great. It would be unbelievable if we just had to write grant proposals. But in fact, the truth of raising money in institutions is that we often have to ask human beings who are not trained, who are not skilled, to represent our ideas and to represent them in the same way that we would want them to, and that's a tricky thing. So I spent a lot of time when I was at the Met just doing these little workshops for the development staff on how to talk about technology and how to feel comfortable talking about technology, and how to talk about that just a tiny little bit. And the other thing I wanted to say is that Douglas has put some pictures into my slides. Yeah, little pictures. Okay.
This one has no picture.
Okay, this one has no picture. And I actually, in the last couple of days, I don't know why, I was looking at some old videos of those Partnership for Drug-Free America things, right? How to talk to your children about drugs, and they're actually kind of amusing, and there's just been a sort of a fascinating update of them in the last 10 years, which is sort of how to talk to your children about drugs if you did drugs, which is sort of this awesome thing. But it's actually kind of great. There are a lot of sort of useful tips in those that I think kind of apply to talking to develop. Oh, Mary, I'm so sorry. Are there any other development officers in the room? Because I say few disparaging things, but I don't mean them to be, generalizable. All right. Okay. So, oops. That's Douglas's image. So here's the thing: when your development staff are not comfortable with talking about technology projects, this is when trouble starts. And one of the things that happens a lot, and certainly happened to us at the Met a lot, was that because what is comfortable for them is saying yes to donors who are enthusiastic about something, they get led by donors a lot. I mean, we had some major projects at the Met, and some of them are actually, kind of credible, and some of them were kind of stupid, that were suggested by donors. The other thing is that we cultivate organizations who sometimes offer you, a server or a piece of software that you may or may not want. Development officers don't know how to say no. The other thing that tends to happen is that they are often led by having heard about another organization doing something. So, much like with the drugs, I think it's really, really important for us to get out ahead of this problem and try to have a relationship with development that allows you to tell them what it is that you want. The other thing that I hear a lot from all of you guys is my development office won't raise money for my technology projects. Hands up if you've ever said that. Not that many of you, but I think you guys are not telling the truth. And on top of that, hands up if you ever said this, they won't let me talk directly to the donors.
I've said that. Not now, but in the
Yeah.
past.
Okay, you want to know why that is? That's because they don't trust you to represent the organization because they can't understand anything you say, right? And so I think this is a really, really useful test of whether or not you are equipping your development staff to go out and talk to donors about technology. If they trust you to talk to donors, it's a pretty good sign that you've figured out how to say things in a way that people who are not technologists might understand. So think of them as your very first audience and try to figure out how to convince them. When they represent you, they'll do it better, and chances are they'll let you represent yourself from time to time. Okay, so it's pretty important to I didn't, again, these images. Okay. So at the heart of my practice in every possible way, I'm a publisher, right? Is basically this idea. Our job is to help people not feel stupid, and mostly we think about applying that to our audiences. I think it's a really good lesson to apply to our colleagues. We're responsible for making them feel clever, but most importantly, we're responsible for making them feel comfortable with our language and our ideas and our outcomes. Okay, back to the Drug-Free America. Y'all are lying to your development officers, and I think that it is something that we should stop doing. I think that when we educate them, we can stop taking the easy path and, lying to them about what's going to happen, what it's going to cost, how long it's going to take, and, build trust in the stories that we tell about what it is that we are trying to achieve and how we're going to achieve it. So just really quickly, and again, we can talk about these things because all of you have as much experience as the rest of us in these areas, but budgets are really, really hard for development staff to understand. Our technology budgets are not like budgets in any other part of the institution, and we can talk about this some more, but the idea of what is an operating cost and what is a capital cost, very, very difficult to pick apart. So I really recommend, and I did this a lot at the Met, sitting down with development officers, going over the budgets, trying to explain the various parts, but really trying to help them understand the cycles, right? How long is this money going to last? And be truthful about that. It doesn't last forever. You have an investment is being made. There are knock-on costs. If you lie about that stuff, somebody gets caught at the end of the day, and mostly it's you. There is this question of not truthfully representing the cost of content development for most technology projects. Almost all of us lie about this. We sort of say vaguely, everyone will participate in creating all of this new content for our massive new website. And then it turns out we actually didn't figure out whether or not we actually had the staff to do that. And again, I think that these are sorts of things that we should be working on together with development because they're sympathetic. They're not really trying to raise less money than you need. And same thing for training. Schedules, too, are really, really difficult for development to understand. Among other things, they are really used to talking to donors about things on fixed schedules, right, with an end date. And we are embracing the idea of agile and phases and things that go on and on and on and on. I think that, again, this is something that we need to try to work together with development people on. But the other thing is they really like to show pictures of what you're going to do. Is that right? And they are so frustrated by our descriptions of what we're going to produce. And I think that it's very useful to think about actually trying to address this by building into your practice ways of actually representing or sketching projects. I personally, in my projects, like to do prototype work, before I start asking for money. And the other thing is, and not all development officers think this way, but many of them do, they seem to believe that every project that you're doing leads to the web. Actually, many of them think that every project leads to a big online collection, and that's just not the case. It's really difficult to explain that some technology projects genuinely are infrastructure. And so, we play these games, we pretend that the outcome really is the web because we think that's what they want to hear, but I think that there are other ways around this. Okay, words that people are allergic to, there are lots of them. This is just the first 10 that I thought of. We can talk about this, but build vocabularies. I'm happy to share my vocabularies that I give to the development staff with you guys. They seem kind of stupid, but most importantly, I think drilling your development team in actually using the words that they may have to use from time to time. So sort of say fake soft words rather than real words are not really that helpful all of the time. And think that just actually, this sounds crazy, but we did it at the Met to great effect. Actually practicing using these words in a sentence can be super helpful. Okay. Oh, development and developer. This is confusing for development staff. They completely hate that. Accessibility, another difficult one, right? Because it means a couple of different things. It means, giving access to a lot of people. It also means something very, very specific around, accessibility to people with disabilities. So trying to sort that with them so they don't, make mistakes that will embarrass us all. Myths that development people believe technology projects are always expensive. Of course they're not. And in fact, I think that, it's actually worthwhile to talk about the range of kinds of ways that we actually ask for and pay for technology. And also, old folks won't give money to technology initiatives. Not so. It's really all a matter, and we'll talk about this some more, of how you characterize the outcome. But I've really struggled in my current job as well with figuring out how to convince development people that, old folks are a target too. And then there are some true things that they believe in. This is where it gets really tricky. I love collaborative projects. I think a lot of you know me and know that that's sort of my sweet spot. But it is true that many development offices are reluctant to get involved with collaborations because they are more difficult to manage, they're more expensive to manage. There's always a sort of suspicion that somebody is going to work harder than, there's always a suspicion that you're going to work harder than all the other people, and that's not going to be fair. And in the point of fact, that usually happens, and it doesn't always matter. But it's hard. It's hard for development officers to buy this. And so I think you have to explain the sort of idea of the way that collaboration in this world works is that people come with different sets of skills and values and ability to contribute. And that is, that there's a kind of way that all works out. Also, and this is one that goes against the very grain of most of your development staff, projects almost always change. And sometimes they fail. And the problem here is that we're not the ones who have to write the report that says, and we changed all of our personnel and the budget grew by this much and the schedule by this much. And by the way, it didn't really work, but we learned something super useful. We know that the federal agencies understand this. We know that the foundations understand this, individual donors don't, and it's a tricky matter. And so thinking in advance with your development staff about how you're going to mitigate the problem of change and failure is a really, really helpful kind of conversation at the start of the planning process. I'm guessing that Nick will talk about this too, but yeah, you can't put a donor's name on a server, and that's really, really tricky. How many of you guys have websites that have a credits page for people who have contributed to technology projects in your organization? See? Yeah. And yeah, you got one? It's an interesting thing because you don't see those names anywhere, and I think that we could do better with this. Anyway, so that is definitely my time. We're gonna move on. Yeah.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
And that was the first time I met Susan, and I don't think I'm that intimidating. She kept looking at me. I was going to hurt her. And we actually, I think, virtually agree on almost everything. I think we come at it from different angles, but I will say in full disclosure that Douglas has fully trained me and the fundraising team in technology speak, and at least letting him have a voice at the table. So I think that you guys know most of this stuff as well. So I'm just going to kind of talk about our strategy and what we do at MIA that we have found is oftentimes successful, not always. Sometimes the best laid plans fail. So really what we do, we have an amazing grant writer on our team, and she's very good at helping provide the feedback and the layout to provide a case statement. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And it should, from our perspective, we look at it as it's outward facing. What is it going to do for the visitor? What is it going to do to advance our mission? Even if it's a specific project, what will happen because of that? What does it do in the community? So it's less about us and more about our community and how it'll help us do a better job and serve our constituents. So once we've started out and we have the case statement and we know what we're talking about, what the project is, or are we looking at, capacity building, then the team usually, and again, development is oftentimes brought in definitely second, I would say, but to help say, are there funders and what do they look like? And so we have great resources in the Twin Cities in terms of our Minnesota Grantmakers Online. You can virtually go in and say who supports technology or who supports digital projects, and you can kind of sort through some of the foundations that way. As well, we subscribe to the foundation directory. Many of our corporations, and this is across the United States, not just in the Twin Cities, but they have very robust web pages that say what their grant guidelines focus on, and when we come, and they change them frequently, as some folks know. So we'll sit down and say, okay, who does technology, and then certainly individuals. We have a robust and engaged board of trustees. We leverage those relationships, and in spite of what some people say, for old people, they do. We've had some good success with some of our major donors who are really super excited. And I do think part of that is Douglas's leadership, as well as our President Kawin's. And that's where we come from in terms of who should make the ask. And our mantra at the museum is always, it's the right person at the right time making the right ask of the right people. So if it means Kawin makes the ask, we prepare her for that. We know what her style is like, and we'll make sure we do all the groundwork, and she will virtually ask anybody for money at any time. And is pretty successful. It's her superpower. If you have a president who has a fundraising superpower, you're very lucky, and we're very lucky at the museum. As well as we leverage our leadership team. If it has to do with media and technology, Douglas is very versed in making the case statement and presenting it in a manner that a corporate marketing person can understand, or a corporate relations person can understand. Most corporate relations people, don't have art history majors and certainly don't have technology degrees. So it's really making the voice in the way that they can understand it. And then, we bring in the folks and kind of articulate. We often have a group of people, of our major donors, that say, what are your top 3 needs? What do you need from us? And we occasionally bundle. We'll talk about our successes too. But we institutionally say, what are our priorities? Because there's been times when we've had to tell Douglas's team, you know what? Douglas gets to decide what the priorities are. And if we're going to fundraise, here's his top 5 projects. And he always has 10, but I only asked for 5. And we do the same thing with our curatorial team and our learning innovation team. So we don't do it in a vacuum. It's with everybody. Our fundraising team is responsible for raising $10 million a year. Where that money comes from and the projects that they go to, we just look at it as we're raising that money. It helps the institution, and oftentimes is budget relief. So however it works, it helps the institution. We always work, our grant team, as I mentioned, we have a fabulous grant writer. She knows how to establish a grant team. So the grant team involves, every grant that we do involves media and technology, regardless of who it's for, because we feel like that has a major place in almost everything that our institution does. We involve our accounting department. They have to create the budgets. Most grants, you have to submit a budget, and they're very good at translating some of those consultants, and what are the other things you put in there, Douglas? Those little line items that we don't know what they mean.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. It's okay. We need it. It needs to be in there. They're important. And those people never leave, do they? Which is wonderful. We love that. So we really engage the whole team at the museum, learning and innovation as well. There's times when it's infrastructure, and then I'll just migrate into some of our wins. The first one, individuals. We actually had a major donor of ours who supported the institution for over 50 years, and he happened to be talking a member of Douglas's team, and got very excited about photographometer. I don't know what it was. But he gave us $46,000.
This is why we drill.
Exactly. And this is why, and exactly to Susan's point, this person and the donor met, spoke. Development wasn't involved, other than I said, show me what you're going to talk about, have some specific items. Let's just walk through what you're going to do. And they met and talked about it, and it all worked out. And I recently sat next to this donor at a dinner and said, have you had a chance to see the photographometer? And he said, yes, he had, but he wanted to learn more about it. And this is amazing coming, from a 70-plus-year-old gentleman, and we love those stories. And we have a number of donors like that. This was one of our bundled asks that we had, where we had a donor who wanted to help us with our strategic plan. And we said, you know what, we need to redo the lobby. We need a new customer relationship management system database. These are 5 things we need. Here's what we think it is. And the nice thing with individual donors is you can do that in a conversation versus the 18-page IMLS grant. And this donor, stepped up and said, happy to do it. In some cases, change always happens. And again, our grant writers, our team, are pretty flexible on that. They know they can go to and say, you know what, it's going to change. We need a new deadline. The project scope has changed, and the development team is good at communicating that to our donors. From a corporation standpoint, and in full disclosure, Fidelity fell in our lap. They don't support technology anymore, but they came to us and did the same thing and said, what are your top 3 priorities that you would like us to fund? Here are the types of things that we do. And we said, you know what, we need to replace the switches. Just something really basic, not sexy. Would you help us do that? And they said, absolutely. But you have to match the grant. So then we went to General Mills. Again, we had a board member that helped us with this. Douglas and that board member had a great relationship. And so they really kind of worked it and went to the leadership team that held the purse strings at General Mills. And we said, you know what, we need $150,000 to match this. We want to do these other things. We also had another project going on with that organization that was more in kind and helping us in a marketing area. So it was kind of leveraging all of those relationships and clearly articulating and saying, it's about the visitor, here's what we want to do. So great successes there, and I'll give, again, Douglas full credit for those. You guys are the key part of helping the development team fundraise. You really are. And I hope that other organizations, have migrated to exactly what Susan is saying, is that you're the ones who can articulate that in a lot of cases. We're just here to, in terms of a development team, to help you with some of the languages and make sure that you're prepared in presenting, knowing who the donor is and who you're going to present to, knowing what their style is. And the government grants that we have, recently the 117 for maps in the galleries, and I was going to read the case statement just so you know what our grant writer can do in articulating lovely words that IMLS says, yay, that sounds wonderful.
Exactly how it works.
It's, again, in 18 pages, but and as well, we had one with, our enterprise content management, and this is one where we had other projects that rose in priority, and so this one came down, and we had to go back to IMLS a couple of times and say, you know what, the scope has changed, we need an extension, and in most times the funders work really well with that. And just by virtue of showing you who has the superpowers, if I could just point out Kaywin in the background.
Thank you.
I just said, this is a person who has the superpowers for fundraising, so you need one of these. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
So given Douglas's penchant for altering PowerPoints, this PowerPoint may be as much as a surprise to you as it is to me. I'm in a new role down in San Diego, previously at the Getty, which had a lot of this stuff. Now I work down here, so I have to do a lot of this stuff. So I have gone from massive resources at my disposal to having to figure out how to get stuff done. The role of my organization is about kind of technology operations in the park, as well as some development initiatives. So I'm going to kind of talk about this. If you're begging for this stuff, that's not going to work. That really is not going to work. I'm just going to cover some of these really high detailed things. It's a barter. People are looking for, I'm going to talk more about this, people are looking for inspiration and good ideas, and they'll give you cash for it. That's kind of what I found down there, and I've thankfully been remarkably lucky. Modesty prevents me from telling you how lucky I've been, but I actually will give you some figures. The truth for me is this is really what it is. It's sales and marketing. I don't have any development people in between me and the people that I'm after to say, we don't want you, the conversations we had earlier, we don't want you in front of these people. So I've kind of been making it up as I've gone along. You have to be this showman and evangelist. If you're not, and I think Susan said this, if you don't believe in what you're asking for and what you need, you can't expect the people that you're talking to believe in that either. You've really got to, people love to empathize with passion. You've got to be passionate about this stuff. So Balboa Park is 27 cultural institutions, and I appreciate this may be a different situation than you all are in. So I have this kind of scale of that I'm dealing with, which is actually hugely beneficial. So what I've tried to do is kind of think about the principles that I'm applying in trying to raise some money. So 27 cultural institutions. So this is where all my kind of options for funding are coming from, and I've organized it by diminishing requirement for rules, starting with federal, state, city, county, local foundations, and then people, and especially rich people, because those are my favorites. So successful, again, for federal funding, because I represent 27 cultural institutions, we've had enormous success in IMLS, NEA, NEH, because we have 27 cultural institutions to kind of partner with and collaborate, and the more of those people you can get in the mix, the more successful you're likely to be. I chase a lot of city and county money. Often these city council members have discretionary funds that there's kind of a mad dash at the end of the fiscal year when they're just trying to give money to worthy causes. I've been successful with that. And then foundations, so local foundations who have these niche interests and niche connections to your local area. I'll talk about a couple of those kinds of things. And then rich people who have no rules. They just want to be inspired, and those are my favorite people. And all this is about figuring out what the connection is, from federal right down to rich people. It's figuring out what is going to connect whatever it is you're doing with whatever it is they want to do. you've got to, for local foundations, the key is doing some prospect research. It's really figuring out who are these local people, what are they interested in, what have they been giving in the past, because that's going to tell you how to frame what you're going after and really whether it's worth going after. So city, county, local foundations, track record, niche interests, and then your gold is the holy grail is this unrestricted funds where they believe in what you're doing and they just give you some money and you can use it how you want to. So let's talk about rich people. They're my favorite. It's worth understanding what rich people are or who they are. They are successful. They are confident. They are allergic to failure. They like to back winners. They seek excitement and they seek to make a difference. Those are really key things that you need to think about when you're talking to these individuals, and these things are constantly in my head when I'm talking to these people. So what does that mean? Prove you can deliver, really believe in what you're doing, failing forward, and in my experience, if you can explain how all this stuff works, failing is acceptable. They want ideas that stand out, and so being a showman and having a wide impact in what you're doing is crucial. But really, everybody is the same. Even when you're talking to that, maybe a local foundation, that person wants to be as much inspired as a rich person as does the person you're talking to at IMLS. I mean, all these people, the county supervisors, all these people want to think that they're investing and contributing to something that is worthwhile and has a wide impact. So I don't distinguish differences between all those things. I just kind of go for it. What I found out in Balboa Park is small ideas, small money, big ideas, big money. And this has been over and over. I have found this to be true. When I got to the park, and actually it's curiously the way BPOC was set up, and some of you may be familiar with this, is really based on this idea. So what happened was there was the parks, the institutions in Balboa Park were going to all these local funders and saying, we want some money to do a website, or we want some money for some computers or a server. And at some point, one of the local foundations says, wait a minute, all you guys are asking me for exactly the same thing. I'm going to step back. I'm going to kick in, rather than a couple of tens of thousands, I'm going to kick in 3 million and set up an organization because this thing is bigger than these small ideas. And so I'm kind of using that principle as I go after money. People can always say no, you can always negotiate down. What I found to be really successful is to include particularly local foundations and those rich people in the ideas as you're formulating them. Invite them to an event and start talking about this thing. Rich people in particular love to be asked for their opinion, and they'll give it. You have to, so you need to be ready for it. But to be included is something that they want to have some kind of control, even though they want to be, they want to kind of give that distance. So one kind of real life thing that I have going down in Balboa Park is this kind of, so it's kind of it's like a big idea. So it's figuring out how to connect to the community. San Diego has a real high military presence, lots of vets. So we have this program, wasn't started by me. I think Rich Cherry was the one who started this, and props to him. This Convoys to Computers, because Rich is a vet. So this idea that we help train, so vets come out of the military with some technical expertise, and we help train them in the museum community. And this has been the gift that keeps on giving. So constantly we have this program, this initiative that we can constantly go back to local foundations who want to support the local community and say, we have this program, if you give us 10 or 20,000, we can bring in a vet and we can train them up and kind of get them ready for the real world. We partner this with another thing that called on-the-job training. And I don't know whether your counties and your cities have this option, but on-the-job training is free money to cross-train people. So they're trying to, address the unemployment situations. And so pairing this kind of on-the-job training with this Convoys to Computers, it allows us to bring in these technical people who are doing the kind of really boring desktop support, networking phones, all that kind of stuff. And that's how I've been able to be successful in kind of staffing those that support. So I said everybody wants to be inspired. So pretty much everything I do, I try and figure out what is the vision here? What's the big vision? And then connect it down to the lowest level, the operational level. And you've clearly had some success at MIA in kind of making that transition of where the really boring stuff is just as important as everything else. Boring and cool are equally important. Start-stop is not sustainable. Conveying that message, that kind of piecemeal, particularly around digitization, start-stop is not a strategic or supportable or sustainable thing. All vision requires strategy, and strategy requires infrastructure, and that's really the thread. That's a little high level, but really that's the thread as I start talking about, here's a massive idea, everybody's excited about it, but there are pieces around this big idea that are operational that I can leverage to kind of get some operational funding. So thinking about a big idea. And so this is how I kind of think about, and I'm going to tell you about my big idea now that I have the doors are shut. So big idea under which there are projects of a whole variety of sizes, which eventually get down to operational projects as well. So I just try and couch all that kind of stuff. So one thing is Wi-Fi. So we're in this park situation, to deliver a whole bunch of things that we want to deliver. Wi-Fi is really just the cost of doing business. And so I've been able to, again, this principle of finding people who are going to give you some, a large amount of money for the big idea, but then also translating down to the city council members who are giving me 10 or 20,000 to contribute to that Wi-Fi infrastructure underneath a much bigger grant that we got from the Irvine for about 600,000. So everybody is part of this big idea, and you can, kind of geographically, you can actually target it to specific institutions and say, go to board members in some of the institutions and say, if you can contribute to this Wi-Fi, it'll be to support, whoever it is, the Museum of Art or the Museum of Photographic Arts. So tying those kinds of things in, claiming community service, it's supporting the community. We have about 5,000 to 6,000 visitors to the park every day. So you really are hitting a wide number of people every day. So metrics and exactly who you're hitting is really important. I'll just share with you, and you may be aware of this, particularly as we talk about Wi-Fi, all the big telecom companies are looking to roll out Wi-Fi in public spaces. Massive opportunity to get Wi-Fi into your institutions free of charge. They just want their SSID kind of there. So I'm just doing a deal with, so we already have Wi-Fi in Balboa Park, but I'm just doing a deal with Cox, who are just going to triple our bandwidth just to have their name on our SSID. So some real opportunities there. So my big idea, and so I've kind of broken it down into, catchy title, Lost in Balboa Park, use a metaphor. So I've got this idea to create this kind of Spotify framework for all the collection and cultural content that is in Balboa Park, and create these playlists. So pretty much even old people kind of know what Spotify is, but you can show them. Creating a proof of concept. Building a website doesn't cost anything anymore. Any number of hosting services, Weebly, whatever it is, you can put this stuff in there rather than standing, what you want to be able to do is stand in front of somebody at a cocktail party, tell them this idea, give them your business card and a short URL and say, go and look at what I'm really talking about, because picture explains 1,000 words. I'm constantly evangelizing. I never shut up about this stuff. Maybe it pisses people off, I don't know. But having some business case around it. So again, this big idea, I'm tying it into tourism, into some business financial models that we've got going in the park that also support this kind of notion of getting people around the park into the extremities and the smaller institutions that are there. So be creative. Leverage a big idea or leverage things that are going on. It is a development, as you probably know, it's a massively creative thing. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and you really do have to enjoy this if you're going to get into it. If you can't make it crucial, make it urgent. If you can't make it urgent, just make it different so that it's unusual and it gets people's attention. If I haven't given you enough good ideas, I'll just share with you that disappointment is the greatest gift of all. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. I want to sort of emphasize one of the points I think all of the panelists made, perhaps, maybe I'm reaching a little, and it's the sailor metaphor. Does everyone know the sailor metaphor? Yep. Right, so you cannot, as a sailor, ever control the direction of the wind. You can still steer, right? And one of the problems we've had as an industry, I think, is that money suddenly comes at us and we're blown off course. Suddenly there's money for some iPads, and then there's money for a website. And what we're not doing is thinking sort of strategically, having a kind of core set of principles that we're trying to accomplish and making sure that any offer of money is supporting what we are strategically trying to accomplish. So we don't respond by being blown off course, we respond by accelerating, turning. Sometimes you have to tack, right? Sometimes you have to kind of cut upwind a little bit, but you can sail the boat. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for being concise so that we can have a conversation. I have a mic. You must have questions for these folks.
Or your own stories.
Or a story that's working.
They're always informative.
Tips, tricks, things you've done, Glenn?
You all are really implied this, but I don't think I've heard the term used, and that is telling a story. If you think of it as any piece of fiction or nonfiction that tells a dramatic story with an outcome that builds suspense and a problem that has to be solved, but as a story that takes you a long, long way. And it doesn't matter whether it's an IMLS grant or a conversation. And what I've told folks to do is start a paragraph where the first sentence is the word imagine followed by a period. And then you're forced to do something or write something that forces the person to visualize exactly what you have in mind. And if you can build the vision and the image in their head, you're a long way there.
Yep.
Who's next? Mic, oh, we got one? Now the mic is working. Excellent. Okay. Now who actually wants to be heard? Now that.
Oh, I think we all heard Len.
Yeah, well, Len's good. Yes, Rob.
I guess for everyone, but Susan especially. When you're working on a cross-departmental project and you might have different voices, even different perspectives for the project, and maybe even a different vision when you go back to your office and say, that guy's great, but just doesn't understand it. I mean, how do you build that kind of consensus before you go to development? Or is it possible to speak with a couple of voices to sort of tag team? I mean, do you have any advice for those kinds of projects?
Well, I mean, is this working?
Is it on? Try again.
Hello. Is that working? No. All right. I think that the idea that we go to anyone, development or the director or anybody, with projects before as a team, when we talk about cross-departmental projects, you're talking about projects that have a lot of players. Douglas and I led a really big one at the Met, which was the development of the museum's first digital asset management system. Oh, and another one, Steve, right? Social tagging, dozens of partners. Those are both projects that we incubated in meetings, in cross-departmental meetings for at least a year each. So we didn't even think about asking for money until, as a group, we didn't have 10 voices and 10 sets of opinions and goals until we had one. And I just don't think it works any other way. I think that if you really, really have a meaningful goal of doing something across departments or across institutions, you put that time in first, because otherwise the fractures they show, it's this business about the passion that Nick was talking about, it has to be shared. It isn't one person's. And so, so at the MCA, for example, we're working on these visual descriptions Sina talked about last night, and we are working together with people from a half dozen different departments, and we put them all in the room together. And by the way, development's at that table. Okay, yeah.
I think the importance of partnership is really strong. In some of my previous stops, development owns the process entirely. And it's been so, not in this stop. One of the things that's terrific being at MIA is that we really work as true partners. And we've established that partnership from day one. And I think if you don't have that partnership, it's something to work on first. So not, hey, development, I need money. And they say, okay, tell me what it is, and I'll go and try to find you money. And then, why would they be motivated to find you money if they don't feel like they're a full partner in the process? So go build the partnership first. then talk together about where the money might come from. And because in some of my previous stops, development would just take the task, right? Like in the old software development world, where you write a long list of requirements and you throw it over a wall and you hope that somebody figures it out, and then they send it back later and it's not what you wanted. And that's where we just fail. And as we talk about agility, it's not just software development. Apply those same lessons to working with a development department. Other questions?
Oh, and actually, can I add to that? I think that to Len's point, the story that you want to tell, it comes out of the actual work that you do together, right? I mean, you can make up a story all you like, but the details, the things that make something real and not a lie, those come out of this sort of planning process that you do together with people, and in the sort of the back and forth and the brainstorming.
So one of the things that I haven't heard, Douglas, from you or from the panelists, is the engagement with marketing staff. Marketing, for the most part, in many museums, owns the conversation and messaging out to the public. And I worry sometimes that this becomes kind of an inward-facing, successful dynamic. That the inward includes the funder, be it the rich guy, or state, city, et cetera, or the development staff, or the developer staff, the technology staff, and from Balboa through MIA, that customer, external audience, has not been part of this conversation. I'm guessing that in all these organizations, somewhere the customer is invited in, because you're all professionals, but I'm a little surprised that the conversation doesn't include it. Here you go, Douglas.
And I think, and I'll defer to Douglas and how much he wants to say about this. We actually have a really great project right now that we're working on that is exactly that. I think probably not up until this point, but it has to be the right project. And I don't know if you want to talk about the tech contest, but we had, engaged one of our corporate partners to help support a tech contest. And marketing was a part of that all along the way, because we really needed them to leverage it and to secure, the contestants and to have a visible presence out in the community. I would say that sometimes it's not always as obvious to include marketing. We're seeing that we're doing that more and more on our grants. Part of it is a PR, part of it is, with press releases. A lot of it has to do with recognition. So they still are a player in all of it, and I think that's not the final story, but part of the storytelling then is, after the grant is received or after the funds, is to go back to the funder and show them beautiful pictures and say, here are the kids in the galleries, here's what this allowed us to do. We had a great mother who had written a letter from her autistic son had come into the galleries when we first redid our African galleries and had a digital map screen on the wall. And the child was very engaged, and he looked at the iPad and then went and found the different objects in the gallery, and the mother took the time to write us, and we took that opportunity to send it out as well. Not really a marketing opportunity specifically, but sharing the story back out to people. We've used that in our corporate corporate funding proposals. We put a copy of that letter, shrunk down obviously, but we use those stories in it. I think more and more of the projects that we're doing are more outward facing, and so marketing is a bigger part of it.
I have two things on marketing. One is that I'm working in a place now where my director says to me very specifically, I want to be in the New York Times museum section. And I have to say, that is not a way I ever thought about my work as something whose target was the Times museum section, but it's actually been sort of healthy for me, and probably would be for the rest of us. So I think you make a good point. The question of whether or not you are telling a good enough story, to a good enough, unique enough, powerful enough story to make it into a story. And so actually one of the tasks that we've done, that we set ourselves in my department, which is, call it publishing, is to actually write stories about the projects that we're doing, to see whether or not it plays. Is this something that holds up? And so we have a bunch of super talented writers, and so we're challenging ourselves to say, does this turn into a story? The other thing I wanted to say about marketing is that I think it's actually super useful for the projects that you don't think are yet fundable. And social media as a marketing tool is really, really an interesting thing. So we have a project going on I maybe shouldn't talk about, which is to try to find a way to use sound on our website in a way that is really, really integrated. And we, because Chicago is a center of sound art, we're partnering with an organization called Experimental Sound Studio. They have curated a selection of sound artists to do this work with us. And we're going to put them through a kind of workshop where they come into the institution and work with Anna, our digital media person, and scholars of sound and sonification, and the use of sound to think about navigating things, and a bunch of other folks, our developers. And every month, the idea is that every month they would put out a little prototype, and it would be evaluated by the community and commented in on our blogs. It's a kind of marketing that puts a project out there in process. So work in process is something I'm really interested in. But also gets us to the point where we can point to something. We can show potential donors a project that is otherwise kind of hard to understand. So you have a little bit of product, and I think that kind of marketing is super useful for projects that are otherwise not quite there. Anyway.
First of all, Douglas, I'd prefer if you don't refer to your jobs as stops. Your stop at Mia?
He said his previous stuff.
Yeah. I also in this conversation, I think it's important to think about audience engagement in its broadest sense and not just marketing, because that's I think a bit siloed. We renamed our marketing division the audience engagement division with the understanding that it includes our brand narrator, social media, marketing, all of the storytelling, because ultimately it's about that connection with audience, not simply a marketing function.
Right. And I think that sort of adds to what you were saying, because if you're sort of narrating the brand, who better to do that than marketing? I'm in the zone somewhere. So including that voice is extraordinarily important. And then also communicating results of what you're up to requires a story. I mean, we hear storytelling back and forth, and storytelling is not just for the public, right? It's also for these sort of internal agencies that happen. Other questions? We have a few more minutes. There must be one burning question you have. We have a fundraiser in the room. Ask her anything.
Well, I'm actually always interested what happens after the grant. What happens when you get it? A couple of things that have been mentioned about sort of the flash and trying to get the attention. And after you've done that, and let's see, if you've been to any of these conferences, there's a whole graveyard of funded projects that won these awards that are just dead. What's the sustainability, and how to that continued message? What's that next message to get that next grant, or the sustainability of these projects?
And I'll take in terms of once you get the grant, there's such a lengthy process after the grant is received too. And that's where, again, I'll give credit to our grant writer, where she keeps that grant team going and making sure that we're meeting the deadlines and following the timeline. There's always a project lead, and then certainly the development lead. But I think what we do too is then tell the stories so that we have other funders that get excited about it. When we invite people to the museum, we'll invite our local foundations to come for tours when we have the opportunity. And then we'll show them and tell them the stories. And then also ask them the question, what are the types of things that you're funding, or would you fund something like this? To make sure that we have that pipeline always in the works, so that the next time Douglas says, hey, you know what I need, you have maybe 2 or 3 that you can go to and talk to about it.
I'm such a needy guy. Nick, you've been thinking a lot about sustainability. More thoughts on that?
You just keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
Just because you got the money doesn't mean you stop talking to those folks. And I try and include them. I just call them up and just say, I got this little challenge, and I'd appreciate your advice. Like I said, certainly for people, individuals who are, and even foundations and rich people, they want to feel included. You know, they want to, you know, they've given you this money. It's like it's like their kid. You know, they want to make sure that their kid's well looked after and cared for and is gonna, you know, be successful. Same, you know.
Are you saying there's a relationship involved?
Maybe. Yeah, absolutely. Because you know, those people. Once those people have made a commitment to you, you know, you can't disrespect them by just moving on to the next thing. But then there is, you know, that's a relationship that you've established that you can use, you know, maybe in a year's time or 2 years' time, you know. But you have to keep the conversation going.
I think we have time for at least one more question. Right here.
What I struggle with is that the timing of asking for money and what you're trying to do totally changes by the time you've gotten that money and you've learned other things and it's been part of a bigger. And now you have requirements to get that going. And to do phase 2, that's another 2 years down the road. And so the whole grant process, and if it's not specific enough or interesting enough, then you're not probably going to get it. Or even with donors, they have this idea of what it's going to be. And so I was just wondering how you finesse it when it's about the bigger, there's categories, but how you say something like this, but could change.
And I think part of, I look at that, and it's everybody's job, obviously, but the grant writer, she knows and oftentimes the funders and what the funder needs, and so is able to say, you know what, that's not the story. We can accomplish it, but here's how the story has to be told. And she can help direct that. I think their expertise comes in on knowing who the funder is and what their guidelines and requirements are.
So my trick on that one, and I'll actually just say that my friend our friend Rob Stein, went to work in Dallas where there are a lot of individuals. He and I had raised a lot of money in federal funds. And he went down to Dallas and then he said to me one day, God, it's so great because you know what, there's no 1.5 year long wait between the grant proposal and the funding. I have an idea and I have the money tomorrow, which is nice. And so I have to say that I've actually begun to think more about the ways in which individual funders are useful. But my trick with that, Jane, is that I think it's really important when you're looking for federal money to be able to make the argument that the thing you're asking for money to do is something that you are already committed to doing. This is important so that you can make the sustainability argument, but it's also important because I think that funders don't want to just fund your frippery. You know, I think they really want you to prove that you're doing something that's essential. And so, to me, projects that you already have underway and you're doing at some sort of, you know, slow pace and discovering things and are going to keep doing in some way, whether or not you get the money. The money allows you to do it bigger or better or with, you know, with more people. But the thing, the project should actually be something that you intend to do no matter what. And I think it makes a stronger argument.
And I hope to God someone tweeted that frippery comment because that's one of the best of the day. I want, please join me in thanking our panelists for bringing their expertise. Thank you for your questions. Enjoy the conference.